Billionaire returns to the diner. After 10 years, Waitress doesn't recognize her first love. What if the love of your life walked back into your world after 10 years, but you didn't even recognize them? Isabella Martinez wiped down the same corner booth she'd cleaned 1,000 times before, the morning sun streaming through Rosie's diner windows just like it had every day for the past decade. The familiar smell of coffee and bacon filled the air, and the old jukebox hummed softly in the corner, the same one that used to play their song. She paused, her cloth hovering over the worn vinyl seat where she and Alex used to share chocolate milkshakes and dream about running away together. Those were different times when she believed in fairy tales and thought love could conquer anything. Now, at 38, with calloused hands and a heart that had learned to protect itself, she'd almost forgotten what it felt like to believe in magic. But sometimes, when the light hit the diner just right, she could swear she still heard his laugh echoing from that booth. "Where are you watching from tonight?" The bell above the diner door chimed, and Isabella looked up from her notepad. She'd been working the morning shift at Rosie's Diner for 8 years now, ever since she'd moved back to Millbrook to take care of her aging mother. The town hadn't changed much. Same tree-lined streets, same faces at the corner grocery, same dreams that seemed just out of reach. Her regulars knew her by name, and she knew exactly how they liked their coffee. Mr. Patterson wanted his eggs over easy with wheat toast. Mrs. Chen preferred her pancakes with a side of fresh fruit. It was a simple life, predictable and safe. "Morning, Bella," called out Jake from behind the grill. He'd been trying to ask her out for months, bringing her little flowers from his garden and staying late to help her close up. He was kind, reliable, everything a woman her age should want. But when she looked at him, she felt nothing beyond grateful friendship. The morning rush was typical until she noticed the black sedan parked outside. Through the window, she caught a glimpse of an expensive suit, polished shoes. Millbrook rarely saw that kind of wealth. Most folks here worked at the plant or the school district, drove pickup trucks, and knew the value of a dollar earned with their hands. When the door opened again, Isabella was busy refilling coffee for Mrs. Henderson. She heard unfamiliar footsteps, confident, purposeful, and called out without looking up, "Sit anywhere you'd like, hun. I'll be right with you." "Actually," came a voice that made her hand freeze over the coffee pot, "I was hoping for that corner booth, if it's available." The voice was deeper now, refined in a way that spoke of boardrooms and expensive dinners, but underneath it carried something achingly familiar. Isabella's heart did something strange in her chest, a flutter she hadn't felt in years. She turned slowly, expecting to see a stranger who just happened to sound like someone from her past. Instead, her eyes met the gaze of a man in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. His dark hair touched with distinguished silver at the temples. He was taller than she remembered, broader in the shoulders with the kind of confident posture that came from success. But those eyes, those warm brown eyes that used to look at her like she hung the moon, those were exactly the same. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" Isabella heard herself ask, though her voice sounded strange and distant. The coffee pot trembled slightly in her hands as she studied this polished stranger who couldn't possibly be the boy who'd kissed her goodbye in this very diner 10 years. Ego Alexander Chen, though she didn't know yet that's who he'd become, smiled sadly and slid into the corner booth. "I don't suppose you would," he said quietly. "I've changed quite a bit since we last met." She approached his table cautiously, her server's instincts kicking in even as her mind raced. "What can I get you?" she asked, pulling out her order pad with hands that she willed to stop shaking. "Coffee black, and maybe—" He paused, his eyes growing distant. "Maybe a chocolate milkshake to share." The words hung in the air between them like a question, like a prayer. Isabella's breath caught. Only one person had ever shared chocolate milkshakes with her in that booth. But this man, this obviously wealthy, successful man, couldn't be Alex. Her Alex had been a dreamer, a boy who'd worked double shifts at the auto shop to save money for college. Her Alex had promised to come back for her once he'd made something of himself. Her Alex had disappeared without a word, leaving only a note saying he had to chase his dreams and couldn't ask her to wait. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Just the coffee? He nodded, understanding flickering in his eyes. Just the coffee. As she walked away on unsteady legs, Isabella felt the careful walls she'd built around her heart beginning to crack. She'd spent 10 years convincing herself that Alex Chen had been a childhood fantasy, a boy who'd taught her that love was just another word for goodbye. She'd buried that pain so deep that sometimes she could go whole days without thinking about him. Behind the counter, she poured coffee with mechanical precision while her mind reeled. The way this man sat, the gentle curve of his smile, the way he'd asked for that milkshake. It was too much to be coincidence. But if this was Alex, if he'd become everything he'd dreamed of becoming, why was he here? And why was he pretending to be a stranger? If this moment touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up. The weight of possibility pressed against her chest as she carried his coffee back to the table, knowing that whatever happened next would change everything. Isabella set the coffee down carefully, her eyes never leaving his face. "You know," she said, her voice stronger now, "I used to know someone who liked to sit in this exact booth. He'd order chocolate milkshakes and talk about changing the world." Alexander's hand stilled halfway to his coffee cup. For a moment, the successful businessman facade cracked, and she glimpsed something vulnerable underneath. "What happened to him?" he asked softly. "He left," she said simply. "Chased his dreams right out of town and never looked back." The words carried 10 years of hurt. 10 years of wondering if she'd meant anything at all. "Maybe," he said carefully. He thought about coming back every single day. Maybe he became successful beyond his wildest dreams, but realized too late that success meant nothing without the right person to share it with. Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs. "That's a nice story, but the boy I knew wouldn't have stayed away if he really cared." Alexander leaned forward, his eyes intense. What if he thought she deserved better? What if he came from nothing, and she was the most beautiful, kindest person he'd ever met, and he couldn't bear the thought of holding her back? What if she never asked to be protected from making her own choices? Isabella shot back, years of frustration spilling out. What if she had followed him anywhere, worked any job, lived in any tiny apartment as long as they were together? The diner seemed to fade around them. Other customers continued their conversations. Jake flipped pancakes on the grill, but all Isabella could hear was the thundering of her own pulse. "Alex," she whispered, finally allowing herself to say the name that had lived in her heart for a decade. His eyes closed briefly, as if hearing his name from her lips was both agony and relief. "Hello, Bella." The coffee cup slipped from her suddenly nerveless fingers, shattering against the floor in an explosion of ceramic and liquid. She didn't even notice. 10 years collapsed into nothing. 10 years of carefully rebuilt life, of learning to be content with safe choices, of convincing herself she was over him. "Why now?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why come back now?" "Because," he said, reaching across the table as if to touch her hand, then stopping himself. "I finally realized that all the money in the world can't fill the space where your heart used to be." Have you ever faced something like this? Let us know in the comments. Isabella stared at him, this man who was both everything she'd dreamed he'd become and everything she'd feared to hope for. "I built an empire, Bella," Alexander said, his voice thick with emotion. "I have houses in 3 countries, more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. And I wake up every morning in a bed that feels empty no matter how many pillows I pile on your side." Isabella sank into the booth across from him, her legs suddenly unable to support her. "My side? I never stopped setting a place for you at my table. Never stopped hoping that someday I'd be worthy enough to come back and ask for your forgiveness." His hands were shaking now, the polished businessman completely gone, replaced by the vulnerable boy she'd loved with her whole heart. "I know I don't deserve it. I know I hurt you beyond repair, but I had to try." "You hurt me?" Isabella laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Alex, you destroyed me. I waited for 2 years. 2 years of checking the mail every day, jumping every time the phone rang, making excuses for why you hadn't called. I defended you to everyone who said you'd forgotten about me." "I never forgot," he whispered. "I wrote you letters every week for the first 5 years. I just never sent them. Why? Because I was a coward. Because every time I succeeded, every step closer I got to being worthy of you, I realized how much time had passed, how much I'd missed. Your birthday, your mother's surgery that Mrs. Patterson mentioned in his Christmas card, your engagement to that teacher. I was never engaged, Isabella interrupted. That was just gossip. Alexander's eyes widened. But Mrs. Patterson said, Mrs. Patterson says a lot of things. Most of them aren't true. Isabella studied his face, seeing clearly now the boy she'd loved and the man he'd become. I never got engaged because I never stopped loving you, you impossible, stubborn man. The words hung between them like a bridge across 10 years of silence. Alexander reached across the table, and this time she didn't pull away when his fingers touched hers. I bought back my family's old house, he said quietly. I've been fixing it up, hoping. I know it's crazy, but I kept thinking, maybe if I made it beautiful enough, maybe if I could prove I'd changed. You were always beautiful enough, Isabella said, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. I never needed you to change. I just needed you to stay. If you've been enjoying this story, subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales. Around them, the diner continued its morning rhythm, but in their corner booth, time had finally stopped running away. 3 hours later, they were still sitting in that corner booth, their coffee long cold, surrounded by crumpled napkins damp with tears and laughter. Alexander had shown her pictures on his phone. The tech company he'd built from nothing, the charitable foundation he'd started in her honor, the old house on Maple Street that he'd spent 2 years renovating with his own hands. I learned carpentry from YouTube videos, he admitted with a sheepish grin that reminded her so much of the boy he'd been. There's still a crooked cabinet in the kitchen that I refuse to fix. It reminds me that I'm still figuring things out. Isabella traced the rim of her coffee cup, her heart full of a hope she'd thought was lost forever. I can't just walk away from my life here, Alex. I have responsibilities. My mother, the diner. I'm not asking you to walk away from anything, he said gently. I'm asking you to add to it. Let me help with your mother's medical bills. Let me help Jake expand the diner if that's what you want. Let me be part of your world instead of asking you to join mine. She looked around the diner that had been her refuge for so many years. Jake caught her eye from behind the grill and gave her an encouraging thumbs up. Somehow, in the way of small towns, word had already spread about who the mysterious stranger really was. Mrs. Henderson had been not so subtly eavesdropping, and now she nodded approvingly from her corner table. I have one condition, Isabella said finally. Alexander tensed, prepared for anything. Name it. We take this slow. I'm not the 28-year-old girl you left behind, and you're not the same boy either. We need to learn who we are now. Anything, he said immediately. All the time in the world. Isabella smiled, really smiled for the first time in years. Well, you could start by helping me clean up this coffee I spilled all over the floor. As they knelt together picking up pieces of broken ceramic, Alexander caught her hand. Bella, yeah? I know I don't deserve another chance, but... She silenced him with a kiss, soft and tentative and full of 10 years of dreams finally coming home. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his. We all deserve second chances. Alex, that's what love is, getting to try again. Outside, Millbrook continued its quiet rhythm, but inside Rosie's diner, two hearts that had spent a decade apart finally found their way back to each other. Love, it turned out, wasn't about perfect timing or ideal circumstances. It was about choosing each other, again and again, in whatever way you could. Some stories end with dramatic gestures and sweeping romance, but the best ones end with two people deciding that ordinary days are extraordinary when shared with the right person. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales. Thank you for joining Bella and Alex on their journey back to love.